Hi, I'm Grant. Welcome to Second Plate, a show all about reusing ingredients from previous recipes and using things that aren't too likely to spoil. So last week on Second Plate, we made breakfast with some potatoes, and it's a very classic thing for me where I have to buy a whole bag of potatoes because they're on sale, and the next day I want to be able to use them in a different kind of meal. So we made breakfast, so tonight we're going to make dinner with potato soup with celery, carrots, and some parsley tonight on Second Plate. So starting with a theme of going from breakfast to a dinner thing, what I wanted to start with is cooking some bacon. And this is going to do a couple things. I'm going to do a light spritz, and I'm going to be rendering this bacon fat is what it's called, where not only am I going to be cooking the bacon, but instead I'm going to be trying to get the fat out of this bacon and get it congealed so I can actually collect it and use it in a couple different things. And this is just some simple bacon. It's got a kind of a maple rub on it, I believe. And this is pretty simple. It's something that I wasn't really aware of until I looked a little more into using bacon to be more than just a side on a meal. But essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to spread it out to get as much contact as possible, and all this fat that's coming off of the bacon, I want that to pool so that when I pull my bacon out, I can have that. And I'm going to take some of it, I'm going to put it away in a jar, and then I'm going to use the rest to actually kind of stir fry up some of my veggies so they have the flavor of the bacon. And then at the very end, I also have some nice bacon I can mix into the soup, as well as if you want to go with more of a like bacon bites thing, you can actually garnish the soup on top. It's very nice and convenient. So I'm going to spread these out while I wait for those to go. Meanwhile, and this is something I actually prepped ahead of the show, is I actually also have some potatoes that have been diced and cut up and salted, and they are currently, I have a boil going in chicken. Sorry. But this will be going just in the background. It's going to be pretty nice, but you don't have to watch it too much. Just get a nice boil going while this cooks, that cooks. And generally this is then when I would prep the veggies. So for veggies, what I have is I'm going to be doing celery, carrots. I like onions, so I'm going to be doing sweet onions or green onions, as well as some parsley and some cheddar. And while these things cook, I'm just going to talk through some of my reasoning for that. So celery, the reason I chose this is because it's a very classic thing with potato soup, but this is something where you will often have a lot of celery left over, like just from this, because it came in a pack, I still have a good chunk of it. And this is not anything I need to actually cook. I can just take it and eat it as is. It's very convenient for that. Same with, say, the carrots. There's something I just often have around. For this, I actually got full carrots, like so. I just wash them down, skin them, take the top off, and it's nice, but I'll admit I have actually, for one of the times I was practicing this, I purposely made it with baby carrots just to prove that I could, because that's something I find I would have around a lot more often, and it's just you can kind of throw in, throw out. And I have to say, what's kind of convenient about this recipe is all these are really kind of optional, because at its base, potato soup's kind of just like a liquidy mashed potatoes. So you can throw anything in you want or omit that you want, and it still comes out pretty nicely. So like if you don't want bacon, if you want to go entirely vegetarian, it's still a really good option because it adds a little bit of flavor, but it's not required. It's really just only the potatoes that actually matter. Everything else is like something to just kind of like mix. All right. I'm gonna turn those around. And I'm cooking this on low heat because I don't want this to boil off. I want the bacon to just kind of reach a good temperature and have all the fat soak out. Once that's done, I'm just going to put it on this towel so it can absorb all the extra runoff. And then I actually have some previous bacon grease from here. It doesn't look like much, but essentially is this congealed little fat, and you can use it kind of like you would use butter. And I'm actually going to be doing this in the next show where we use this to basically season the dish. It'll give it like kind of a bacony taste, and unlike, say, meat, if you don't want to freeze bacon or worry about this, this can last like about 2 to 3 weeks in your fridge. And I just say, like, take a little bit out, take a spoonful, put it down on the pan like you would a pat of butter or something like that, and it's surprisingly convenient and really does bring a lot of flavor. Like, it's another thing where you can just have this in your fridge just inconspicuously, but when you pull it out and throw it on the grill, instantly it's got that smell like you're cooking bacon in the morning. Keep checking on this. That's starting to boil. That's perfect. Essentially, I'm going to bring this to a boil in the chicken broth and then let that sit for about 10 minutes. That's probably far the longest thing to cook. Same with the bacon. It's just letting it sit and kind of go. And then we're going to drain it off. Collecting oil is something that is a fairly new concept to me because you can do the same with when you fry things. Like one of the first things I did, not for this show, but just when I was trying to make a foray into cooking was I wanted to make like legitimate French fries. I want to fry them. And a big part of that is you have to recollect the oil. So basically the way you do that with bacon or with that is you just have a good jar like this, something that will not melt because this stuff's going to come off very hot. And then I just have a little strainer, sieve, and I'm just going to be pouring it into this. And it's simple, it's a little, I don't know, like it's not the most majestic thing, but it's something you want to think ahead about because once this oil's really hot and it's coming off the pan, you don't want to be sitting there pouring and you realize it's melting through your pan. It's just something I wanted to call out. But otherwise, we just got some very simple ingredients to go with this. I've got some butter that I'm bringing up to room temperature. I'm going to be salting in with the potatoes. I usually like to wait to salt too much because depending on what kind of chicken broth you got, that can add a lot of salt to it already, and it's really hard to dial in. Like, I'll give specific ingredient amounts on what I can, but a lot of this dish really is just kind of seasoning it to taste. And that's something where I always hated that term, learning to cook, because part of me always thought that it's their way of saying, like, just keep doing it until you get good at it. And it was annoying, but I kind of get it now. I'm still a little annoyed when I read a recipe and they're like, oh, just season this to taste, but the only time to season it is when it's boiling hot, or you have to get it out of the oven constantly, just be like, does this need a little more salt? So one of the things I originally did when I wanted to start learning to cook was collecting grease, and that's why this kind of idea came from, was finding a better use for this bacon, like using kind of all of it. So I'm going to actually collect the bacon, as I said, and I'm just going to pour it straight into here. It looks like it's pretty much done. But all I'm going to do is I just have this little sieve mesh, and it's going to catch some of the just different bacon bits because I don't necessarily want that. I want the fat, but depending on what I cook, I don't necessarily want specks of bacon inside it. So I'm going to go ahead and start by pulling the bacon off because it's looking pretty good. I'm going to put it down on these towels because right now the bacon itself is probably too greasy for me to go, and it's hot. So you want to kind of collect anything that's on there before you serve this. We're going to just stash it to the side until we are done with our potato soup, then garnish with it. Maybe add some in. And what that leaves us with is just all this excess fat. So I'm going to very carefully, in a container that will not melt from the heat of the bacon, I'm going to collect most of it, leaving just in like enough as if I was going to season my pan. Cool. That'll work for right now. Kind of fish some of these little specks out. These won't be an issue because these are all going to eventually go into the soup. It just depends on what you want. So if you were, say, you wanted to prep this a little bit more ahead of time, you could even make the bacon entirely ahead of time or just bring in the grease. Like if you had, say, done this stuff for breakfast, this would be very convenient to just bring out just the grease. So I'm going to start just kind of sauteing all my ingredients in here. Got my green onions, carrots. Again, this isn't essential. It's just going to give all these veggies the flavor because if you're like me, I mean, it'd be nice to put 20 strips of bacon inside this, but it's not really feasible or maintainable. And I don't think I talked about the parsley yet. The parsley doesn't really add any flavor, but this is here to basically give it more color. If you had seen the show where I talk and made the salsa, it's kind of nice to have just like the different colors because eventually a lot of the green is going to shrink down compared to the carrots. So it's nice to have like little specks of green in the otherwise entirely white sauce. So I'm just going to get this. Got a spatula. Going to make sure I get this. And I'm no master sauteer, and really I'm not necessarily even cooking because the majority of the cooking is going to happen soon when I add it to this. But what I'm trying to do is just get this to soak up all the fat. Like that's the big thing, especially with like potatoes, that I'll be honest, I'm pretty cursed with potatoes. I always set off my smoke alarm or I never cook them well enough. And I think the biggest thing that I took away is that I was going too light on the fat because I didn't want to seem like the guy who was just, oh, let's throw in 2 sticks of butter to every single recipe. But what that was happening is you need to get all that fat kind of soaked into every little part because that's what's going to actually cause the cooking to happen. Otherwise, you're just going to have potatoes that are burnt on like the smallest millimeter of the surface. Same with these. So I'm just going to keep going around, get those done. Maybe turn it up a little bit because I want a high heat now. Personally, and this is something I should also mention, is I put in about 5 potatoes, which is less than my original recipe because I noticed that when I made this and I practiced it more, that I actually wanted the chunkier vegetables. I didn't want just potatoes. So I'm actually trying to get a lot of veggies in here. So I'm gonna keep doing that. Should be pretty good. I essentially filled up this pot with enough chicken broth to cover the potatoes to about 1 inch over them. And then this is looking pretty good smelling. I'm actually going to try, again, I like to emphasize this. I like just trying things because as I practice, I'll just try a couple different things. Like I'm gonna put the pepper in. And even though I couldn't find any recipe that used it, I have a hunch that this would be a perfect time for like garlic, to add that in there and get a really good smell. And maybe this is a selfish thing, but I like foods that I can show off with when I cook. And like I said before, I instantly have that smell that people want to come over like, hey, what are you cooking? Like if you ever cooked with like actual butter, as soon as that hits the pan, anyone in the house is just like, hey, what smells so good? It's like, oh, that's just a ton of butter. But it has that exact effect. Cool, looks like our bacon's doing pretty good. So I'm gonna just put this over here to kind of cool and just stay out of my sight for a little while. Perfect. We have our potatoes, which are cooking down pretty nice. You'll notice I'm not giving very exact measurements with a lot of this. It's really something you just have to dial in as you go. So how many potatoes really is up to your own personal preference. How many veggies is up to your preference. How creamy you want, because that's the next thing we're going to do here is we're going to make essentially a sauce. I'm going to turn it back up because the temperature is going to drop because I just put in a bunch of hot vegetables, but they're not nearly as hot as a boiling pot over here. We got this. I'm going to just tap that. I really do like this. This is a little device that has saved me so much trouble just because it's so convenient and so easy to wash compared to trying to make your main strainer work. And here you can even see it's kind of melted the rest, where I think it's kind of off-putting when you first see just what looks to be like a really unclean jar of, you might not even know if it's fat, but once you see it melt down, you're like, okay, I kind of get it. It goes back to being like the real thing I want. All right, and next we're gonna start with making what I believe you would call a sauce, because that's kind of what it is. You make it like a sauce, but it's weird to think, like no one would ever look at you straight if you said, I put sauce on my soup, but really that's what we're gonna do. And one thing I kind of liked about this recipe is I've definitely, from doing this show, started seeing more and more patterns. And a big one that I never really did anything with was sauces. And as I would make different ones, like I made like a really good mac and cheese, I made this, I made a one sauce for some Philly cheesesteaks. They all start the same. They all pretty much are like, take a bunch of butter. This is about 1/3 of a cup. And I'm going to melt it down. I'm going to drop this pretty drastically. Good, because I don't want the butter to smoke. I want it to melt. So this is probably a little hot. That's going to be okay, because I'm going to let that sit. I'm going to continue adding some stuff here to make it form up. But pretty much every major sauce, down to like something I made with, like say some spaghetti, to what have you, this sauce to, like I said, with macaroni and cheese, it's all, get your butter, then you add in some flour, and it gives it more of a form. Like that's what makes it sauce instead of just, I don't know, just butter. So we're gonna get this around, and it should seem like there's a little bit too much flour because I'm just gonna add a lot of milk in here in a second. And it's gonna look like there's way too much milk because I'm gonna let that, not exactly boil down, but I guess just the best way to say it is thicken, just kind of boil off mass. That's why I'm not too concerned about having a pan that's too hot, because this is going to bring it down pretty drastically. So I'm just gonna pour it. I wanna do about 2.5 cups. It's really not a big deal if you go over at all, because you have to keep in mind that while this is going to look like this whole big long thing, and you can even add like cheese or probably cook some more scented vegetables in here, really that's gonna have very little effect on your end soup because like the potatoes are just so much mass. So I'm just going to keep adding this. And this was something that again was like a turn off because this looked like I was just, I don't know, like making butter cereal, but it's really actually what gives the color back to the soup. Because I make the soup with, I'm going to stick with this, not the whisk. But I actually make it with chicken stock, as I said, not water. So the whiteness of the soup comes more from this milk and the butter than the potatoes. It was something that actually surprised me because I thought, oh, I'll have the potatoes, they're going to be white. But really, there's so much yellow in the chicken stock that you kind of need this to get it back. And this is kind of also where it'd be a good time to salt your recipe because this is a lot more accessible than reaching into a cooking pot. And I can kind of get an idea of what it's going to be, but it's something I think personally I need a little bit more experience in before I judge it because you have to keep in mind where this is going to have a very interesting flavor because it's just flour, maybe cheese, milk, that kind of thing. But when you add it to 5 russet potatoes, it's really going to drop it. But I want to get it to a point where it's just starting to bubble like this. And this would be a point where I would kind of maybe either cover it or walk away. Just keep an eye on it because I don't want it to literally boil. I just want it to slowly burn off everything. So it's the same, it's like dry mass, but the liquid's slowly going down. And even if like this doesn't come out, there's nothing stopping me from pouring a little bit more milk just straight in this pot. And I have theorized, you can even see it's kind of like forming up into a nice sauce now. I've theorized that this would be a good moment to put together some cheese in here if you wanted to have like a cheesier soup. I'm actually going to then get a little bit of sour cream. There you go. Not much, it's just a little bit of richness like that it adds to it. This is entirely preference and just something I wanted to kind of experiment a little bit more with. I also saw several recipes that recommended buttermilk instead of regular milk, just to kind of see what type of soup you want. Because I think that really the subtext here is if you want really good potato soup and you're not at all calorie conscious, throw in another stick of butter, do the buttermilk, do the sour cream, do the cheese sauce, because then that's what's going to be pretty awesome. But it can be deceptive. Like on one hand, this is such a good recipe for just, you know, getting a bunch of veggies that you might not otherwise cook with and making a healthy meal. Or you can go way worse and just say like, oh, I'm just going to take all the cheese in my fridge, all the butter, and the sauce will let me hide it, and it will look like this awesome homemade dish. Cool. So I'm going to just turn this down a little bit again. I'm going to take my ladle and I'm going to ideally fish out a couple potatoes without too much. And I'm just going to test these just with my spoon here. And what I'm looking for is for it to be easily pierceable without too much effort. And that tells me that it's nice, soft, and mushy. I'll just use the back of my knife. So I want to be able to like easily like push through there. So almost like it's like mashed potatoes. Because what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking this sauce, and if I timed it right, the stirring of this sauce into the soup is going to make all the potatoes just fall apart. And then that's when it's the potato soup. So I'm just going to take another look here. And if not, like I'm going to put this in ideally a little bit early because I can have any excess stuff cook off in here. Let's stop that. And I'm going to add my sauce. It's not going to look like much, and I might even need to add probably some cheese or something here just to further give it out. But I'm just going to stir it and let it go. And as this kind of melts into the chicken broth, that's when we're going to get our soup. And this is when you might want to start thinking about how thick you want this. Because at this point, we're approaching where everything is optional from here. So if I have this, I could just leave this go, let's say a little bit on high, since I just put something in, and let it boil down to a really thick, creamy potato soup. That's the perfect time to do that. And personally, I just like tossing in some bacon as well because it makes it interesting to eat. Like obviously everyone kind of wants the bacon in there. It's not so much I can't dump in a ridiculous amount of it, but what I can do is, give enough where, okay, you got the flavor of all the different veggies that have been cooked in it. You have the sauce, but it's kind of nice when you're like, oh, I got one of the ladles with some bacon in it. But yeah, now we'll just probably have this simmer down once it's heated back up, and we'll get it nice and thick before we'll go ahead and garnish it. What's important is I want to make sure I leave it a little bit still soupy, because one thing that potato soup, because of how it works, will do is, and this is important if you have leftovers, is it will kind of congeal just because of the way it is, and that's fine. If you want to get a little bit liquid again, just heat it up with some milk or some water, just cut it with that, and then that's when it's going to be more of what you expect. So right now, it's going to look a little soupy, but I want to take this out before I serve it, and that way it's not going to be too soupy or too congealed when I actually get it out. And I actually purposely don't make sure that all the potatoes are liquid, and that's important for me personally, because I want to still be able to have potatoes. But that is something where I've seen it recommended, where people will take half the soup out, blend it, put it in the food processor. That way you can get like the main creaminess of it when you want to eat it. Or you could just keep boiling it. There's actually plenty of variations to this in which you do it in like a pressure cooker and you leave it overnight. But here we have our potato soup. Next time on Second Plate, I have a recipe in mind where we can reuse our potatoes, maybe make some bacon alongside it, reuse our onions, and hopefully make a pretty good breakfast, as well as reusing our bacon fat in a nice, fun little recipe to make some good food without having to always grill a big plate of bacon, but still get that bacony taste you kind of expect with breakfast. It's pretty fun.